A police officer stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, trying to hold back his laughter. In front of him was a teenage girl, no more than 15, insisting with a straight face that her mother wasn't just in the military, but in the special forces. To the cop, it sounded ridiculous. He had seen plenty of kids exaggerate about their parents before. Some would claim their dad was a spy. Others would say their mom was a secret agent. But this one, she was dead serious, and that made it all the more amusing. The officer chuckled, shaking his head, telling the girl she needed to stop making things up. He pointed out that special forces were made up of highly trained soldiers, mostly men, the kind who had gone through brutal training and endless tests. He said it was unrealistic, almost laughable, to think her mom would be one of them. But the girl didn't flinch. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't back down. Instead, she stared straight at him and said, "You'll see." The cop raised his brows. To him, it was just another kid bragging, desperate for attention. But what happened next left him speechless. Because just as he was about to lecture her on telling tall tales, a woman walked around the corner, calm, confident, and radiating the kind of presence that could silence a crowd without saying a word. And when that woman came closer, every doubt, every smirk, and every trace of laughter on that officer's face vanished in an instant. That girl's mother wasn't just in the military. She wasn't just a soldier. She was the real deal, the kind of person who had faced dangers the officer couldn't even begin to imagine. And the way she carried herself made it absolutely clear this was no ordinary mom. This was a woman trained to handle situations most people would never survive. The cop who had laughed suddenly found himself standing at attention, trying to gather his composure, realizing he had underestimated not just the girl, but her mother too. What unfolded in that moment turned into an unforgettable lesson about respect, about judgment, and about how little we often know about the people standing right in front of us. This isn't just a story about a cop's mistake. It's about perception, bias, and the quiet strength that often hides in plain sight. Because sometimes, the people we least expect turn out to be the ones carrying the heaviest burdens and the most remarkable achievements. And in this case, that teenage girl's words, dismissed as childish fantasy, turned out to be the undeniable truth. Her mom was special forces. And when she arrived, there was no denying it. The story began on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. The officer had been called to respond to a minor situation involving a few teenagers near a local store. Nothing serious, just a misunderstanding between kids, the kind of call that usually didn't lead anywhere dramatic. But within that small moment, an unexpected encounter unfolded that became unforgettable. The girl involved in the situation had been quiet at first, explaining calmly that she needed to call her mother to come pick her up. When asked why she seemed so sure her mom could handle things, she had simply stated the truth. "My mom's in special forces." To most people, that line would have been enough to stop and think twice. But to the officer, it triggered disbelief. He assumed the girl was bluffing, trying to make herself sound tougher than she was. After all, how many times had he heard stories from kids trying to make their families seem extraordinary? Dozens, maybe more. So he laughed. He didn't mean it in a cruel way at first, but the laughter carried a sting. It was dismissive. It was the kind of laugh that told someone, "I don't believe you, and I don't take you seriously." But the girl didn't waver. She looked him straight in the eyes, repeating herself with absolute certainty. And that confidence, instead of convincing him, only made him chuckle harder. He reminded her that women in special forces were extremely rare, that it took years of training, physical trials, and mental tests to even qualify. He asked her if she even knew what that meant. And she simply nodded. She didn't argue, didn't shout. She just said her mother could handle it. It wasn't long before a car pulled up nearby. The officer didn't pay much attention at first, until he noticed the woman who stepped out. She wasn't dressed in uniform, not carrying any flashy signs of authority, but everything about her demanded respect. Her posture was sharp, her eyes focused, her movements controlled with precision. It was the way she walked, like someone who was always aware of her surroundings, someone trained to notice details others missed. The girl lit up instantly, calling out "Mom!" and rushing over. The officer turned, still unconvinced, but as the woman came closer, something shifted. She had that presence, that aura. Even without a single word, It was obvious this wasn't an ordinary parent showing up to pick up her child. The officer greeted her, still skeptical but more careful in his tone now. He mentioned what the girl had said, half expecting the woman to laugh it off. Instead, she looked him directly in the eyes and said calmly, "She's not wrong." For a brief second, he froze. He thought maybe it was just a clever line, another exaggeration. But then she mentioned her service record, not in detail, but enough to make it clear. Deployments overseas, specialized missions, training that most people couldn't even imagine completing. She didn't brag, she didn't raise her voice. She just stated it as a matter of fact, like it was nothing unusual. The officer's smirk disappeared completely. His posture straightened without him even realizing it. And in that moment, he felt a wave of humility wash over him. He had mocked the girl, dismissed her words, and now here he was, standing in front of someone who had likely endured situations far more demanding than anything he had faced on the job. The girl stood proudly beside her mother, not needing to say, "I told you so." Her expression said it all. That short encounter left the officer thinking deeply about the assumptions people make. He had been quick to judge based on stereotypes, assuming special forces was a world reserved almost exclusively for men, assuming a teenager's words couldn't be trusted, assuming he knew better. Yet reality had just proven him wrong, in the most direct way possible. Over the next several minutes, the conversation shifted. The officer asked a few respectful questions, and the woman responded politely, though she never went into unnecessary detail. That was another reminder. People who have truly lived through those kinds of experiences rarely feel the need to brag. Their confidence doesn't come from showing off, it comes from knowing what they've accomplished, and carrying it quietly. By the time they left, the cop's perspective had changed. He realized he had learned something important, not just about that family, but about himself. He had been humbled. He had been reminded that respect should be given before judgment, and that the strength of people, especially those we least expect, should never be underestimated. That story spread quietly among those who knew about it. Some heard it as a funny tale about a cop getting proven wrong. Others saw it as something more meaningful, a lesson about bias, about respect, and about the silent power carried by people around us every day. The officer never forgot it, because sometimes the strongest people in the room aren't the ones demanding recognition. They're the ones who walk in quietly, with a calm presence that says more than words ever could. And in this case, that quiet strength belonged to a mother who just happened to be one of the elite few serving in special forces. This wasn't just a moment of embarrassment for a cop. It was a turning point, a reminder to look past assumptions and realize that greatness doesn't always look the way we expect. That girl's confidence wasn't based on fantasy, it was based on truth. And when her mother arrived, the truth silenced every doubt. The laugh that began the encounter ended in respect. And that single interaction told a bigger story about judgment, humility, and the quiet heroes walking among us every single day.